Back on another episode, session, whatever you want to call it, the Dr. Zero Trust podcast thingy. We got Rick Moy from AccuKnox here. I'm going to ask Rick to give a quick kind of background on who he is and what he does, and then we're going to talk about AccuKnox in the context of ZT, which is interesting because I was not intimately familiar with the capabilities that fit into that space. So, Rick, if you don't mind, kind of give us a background on yourself and the company.
Yeah, sure. Hey, Chase, great to be with you. We've known each other for a while, but you've all been in the space. Been in security since the '90s. Number of different technologies, but I think one of the really promising initiatives, I guess, right now over the last few years that you've been involved in, that I think is really helpful for the industry is that of zero trust. How do we change the way we think about defending ourselves and designing systems that are robust, resilient, and easier to manage in the long run. So I am currently Chief Product Officer at AccuKnox, which is a CNAPP cloud native application protection platform, which is basically as you know, having been an analyst, entails a lot of things and different things to different people. But the easiest way to think about it is a combination of security posture management and workload runtime security. And that's really where I think we have one of the key differentiators in how we're approaching the space is thinking about applying zero trust to your workloads.
And so within that context, let's explore just the CNAPP piece of that, because that's kind of I would say a newish term. Like, I hadn't run across that in too much research. It makes sense from the conceptual side of it, but like, why is AccuKnox calling itself a CNAPP, CNAPP for those that are listening? Like, what's the differentiator there as opposed to just being a zero trust app security, whatever?
I think, to be blunt about it, right? There's in the ecosystem of that includes customers, vendors, analysts, right? These terms get created to help everybody align what problem they're trying to solve. And CNAPP is a broader blanket, and so the promise is that it helps you, in a sense, shift left from maybe just looking at posture to now also looking at infrastructure as code, looking at misconfigurations, and how those propagate from your pipelines. And by pipelines, I mean it in a general sense, from the developer side. Am I pushing code? Am I pushing infrastructure code? Am I using, other people's software in the supply chain? Everybody is the short answer. And do you know where it came from? Can you trust it? Do you have some kind of understanding or attestation to what's in that, right? Think, a bill of materials, SBOM. And what is the application actually doing? Which version's actually running, right? Because the new paradigm is not running something on-prem and you're on a VM that you understand, but it's a more dynamic developer pushes a button, says commit the code, things happen in the pipeline, and voila, new Kubernetes workloads are spun up. You have some of this version, some of that version, have that opportunity. So the challenge is to know what's actually running, what's the security status of it, and where are my risks, what's a legitimate event in my log stream versus something that I expect to happen. So now you have, kind of this confluence of dev ops and security, call it DevSecOps, right? It's a new idea that all three of these functions need to come together and work together. And that may be a team, it may be different, people that form a committee or, a Slack group, however it may be. But so long-winded answers to like why a CNAPP. I think it's, fundamentally trying to address the fact that all these things are coming together and that the buyers are increasingly trying to reduce the number of products they buy, but have fewer panes of glass, fewer integrations, fewer, vendor risk assessments to go through, fewer repositories for data, fewer places to configure applications. So I think that's the overarching idea, at least for my
And is this, yeah, I mean that, so like there's the convergence going on there. Is this a something that developers are jumping on, or is it security people, or is it like if you had a room full of 100, people, like who's the buyer and who uses this type of thing? Because there's so much marketing that goes on around SBOM and cyber and cloud and app security and ZT, whatever. Like where's the person or the work role in an organization that goes, this is the problem I'm solving?
Well, that's a great question, and it's probably an open-ended one. I think it's akin to that age-old metaphor that we use of applying security to your network, is kind of like trying to paint the bus as it's driving down the road, right? And what we've seen is that with the cloud, and the emergence of these XYZ as a service, developers are purposefully lazy in a good way, right? They're trying to take the path of least resistance. How do I get the functionality out that my CIO wants me to enable, right? And well, there's a cloud database, there's a function as a service, there's XYZ. Let me just do that, and I'm not going to go ask security if it's okay, probably, right? I'm just going to get it done, and then they can review it and whatever, right? That's kind of a, from the developer standpoint, a potential mindset. Now, that's not everybody's, right? But I think what you have is a situation where there was a lot of experimentation and rapid prototyping, and just out of business necessity, people said, "Oh, it looks good enough, ship it," right? And so in many cases, security is trying to catch up, and security's got a learning curve, right? Because it's a new platform. They're not necessarily developers, so it's a journey, I would say. And so, who is the buyer? It really depends on the maturity of the organization, how they're organized, how well they work together. And I've seen all different configurations, right? Some are driven by security, and they have a wonderful relationship. I was in a conversation yesterday, and it happened that the CIO was also the CISO, which is a little bit of a conflict of interest, but he was able to bridge both gaps because he was originally from the security side of the house. But I've just seen it all. I don't think there's any perfect pattern.
So really, if you're doing apps or dev, or you're building stuff, code, those types of things, is probably of interest to have something like this fitting into your overall security practice, as well as in a perfect world, we offload the security requirements from the developers and we offload the application stuff from the security people. Are these types of solutions making it where that's more feasible? Because I'm a security person. I do not want to do anything with writing code or whatever else. Honestly, if I'm writing code, things have gone to hell because I'm not a good app developer or developer, period. But we've got this kind of mix that goes on where we try and make everybody a security person, and we try and make every security person also an app engineer. Are using these types of solutions making it where there's there's more clarity between those two, or are we still mushing them together and hoping everybody, gathers around the campfire?
I think they are adding clarity, actually, right? Because you're right. People want to naturally limit the scope of their concern. What is it that I need to actually look at? What's the least I need to do to, um, get through and meet my objectives? So, by putting these things into a common unified framework to look at, and it's interesting because that brings us to the debate of, well, is it, security policy as code, or is it a, single pane of glass, or is it a GUI, right? With nice bar charts and, you know, world map graphs of threats and things like that, or checklists. And the answer, needs to be a little bit of all of it, right? Because you're going to have different styles. So developers will prefer to, put things into, an API or CLI type framework. Security people, typically have to answer up to audit. And so there's a checklist mentality, or there's, I need the percentage of coverage and how it's trending over time, right? Are we reducing our attack surface and risk, or and so you have, fundamentally different types of tools that each want to see, but they need to be rooted in a common data set, and common source of truth. And that's where, integrating these sources of data is really important. And that's one of the key approaches that we've taken, is allowing folks to use their existing tooling, right? If you're using, SonarQube and Nessus and or Rapid7 or Qualys, right? You can bring all those things together, put them in a common data framework, process it, and have a unified view, as opposed to having to go to different interfaces. Because very few organizations have just one tool for one job.
Yeah, I mean that's a big problem, is that there's, the whole defense in depth thing. Rick Hollins, friend of mine, super smart guy, like he coined the thing around expense in depth. I think that's what it really winds up being, is you just keep buying stuff and throwing money at the problem, and eventually, I don't know, by the transitive property of cyber and dollars, you solve the problem, when in reality it's just more for the sake of more. Is there a particular piece of the stack that you see folks going, we are using AccuKnox and now we don't need this? Is it we use AccuKnox and we don't need any more firewall, or we use AccuKnox and we're done with SIM? Like where's the, if I have a finite budget, where would I get some offset using a solution that does the stuff that you're talking about?
I think, there's, broadly speaking, there's two buckets of functionality that we provide. And the CWPP, cloud workload protection, which is like actual runtime behavior, is where I'd say the most new greenfield functionality is, from a market perspective, that folks are just starting to adopt that as a means of effectively shifting left and not being stuck in a detect and a respond mode. But I think on the other side of the posture management side, there's a number, we're seeing a lot of customers reduce the number of different tools they use and try to consolidate them on that, right? So vulnerability, misconfiguration, there's a lot of different tooling there that can be consolidated down. So
Yeah, I mean it's a whittle down thing. I think that's probably some of the misconception a lot of folks have, is that if I buy this, I can get rid of these three things, when in reality, like smartly, it's more of a, here's something that solves a problem particularly better than the other stuff. Let me kind of age this off and grow and evolve, and you get to a stack that's kind of optimal for your org. I also wanted to kind of ask some of the question around, you guys have got an open source capability here, and what was the thinking in in having open source as part of that? And then like what's the fix that's applying to the market? Because open source software, I mean, I think I saw an article yesterday that said that someone used a chat GPT plugin and tied it into open source, and they built an app. I think it said it took them 12 minutes, which obviously makes me concerned about like what the hell this app's doing and how the configurations are and whatever. But that's all open source. You guys have got a way that you can play in there. And so someone could have actually called an AccuKnox thing to help them make sure that the 12-minute app they were building was more secure, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about that for a second, because that's I think one of the coolest things about what we're doing is, and the great thing about open source is, people can audit the code, they can download it, run it, try it for free on a test system or in production for as long as they want, and they see exactly what's happening without having to talk to a salesperson, without having to read marketing literature, without having to go to an event, and that has resulted in really the buyer and the user of these tools being able to self-service and decide on their own what they're going to adopt into their environment. And many organizations that we work with have said, hey, we wouldn't have even been using your product or considering giving you money if we couldn't try it for free, if it wasn't open source, because then we have also the ability, if it's that critical to us, that we can have a developer contribute additional functionality. And that's a way that you don't, that's a whole business model that doesn't even require money to change hands, but puts more power in the customer's hands that wasn't there with traditional SaaS offerings. But essentially what we do, and what you're referring to, is KubeArmor, which is something that we developed and then gave to CNCF, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. And it's a sandbox project. It's got over 600,000 downloads, probably higher now since I last checked. And when I was at KubeCon earlier this year, we had the community meeting. There was 45 brand new users that showed up and said, hey, we are interested in deploying this. So it's getting huge traction. And what it does is it allows you to actually put guardrails around an application. And an application can be, an image that you've created, internally. It could be something that you're running that you've downloaded off a Docker Hub. It could be a virtual machine. It could be a bare metal application, because fundamentally what we're doing is going back to some of the great underlying foundations in Linux called Linux security modules, LSMs. So most people don't know what I mean when I say that. Folks who've got a DoD background will know, because they read the manuals for these things. But what we're talking about is SE Linux, AppArmor, BPF LSM, and these are kernel level primitives that give you control over system processes at a very fine grained level. So you can observe and control things like file opens, file writes, network connection opens, things like that. And so if you think about it, it's in a sense, it's a kernel level firewall for your application. So whereas if you zoom out and look at the security industry, we were on a 20, 30 year course of having a network firewall, right? That basically stopped, certain unknown packets from certain destinations, et cetera, based on the content, from reaching your device. And your device may have an application on it, but once you let that packet through, it could do whatever it wanted on the host with the application. So what we've now done is taken that concept and enabled it at the application level. So you can restrict, so that an application can only touch this file directory and only talk to this network participant, right? And so we didn't invent this, we just made it easier, right? Because the problem with SE Linux and AppArmor is they each have their own configuration languages, they have their own nuances, and even if you're pretty technical, it can get pretty involved and complicated to write once, let alone maintain. So, it might be something that an ops person, like sysadmin, would do, but developers, in my experience, typically haven't enjoyed or wanted to do that. And so what KubeArmor and AccuKnox does is makes that process pretty seamless. We have the KubeArmor is the enforcement part, but we also have a policy discovery engine which monitors the application behavior and watches the application running, and then spits out a language, a unified language for LSM enforcement. And it's in the YAML format, so it's easy to read for developers and security people. And you can see it says things like, hey, the Vault application that runs my passwords, there I've put all the secrets in, only that application is allowed to touch and interact with files in the /vault data directory. So if anything else tries to touch that, even if it's root level credential, will be denied, because that's being enforced at the kernel level. So you can imagine if you have an application you want to deploy and you'd like to lock it down, say, to prevent it from, getting breached, or if it does get popped by, say, a log4j or some exploit or whatever the next big thing is, it may be popped, but then someone won't be able to traverse laterally to other things if you've locked down the network connectivity. Or you can say, okay, well, that application can still only touch this directory, or it doesn't have any disk access at all. There's no volume mount points that are enabled. So you can actually proactively create policies and restrictions and guardrails around your applications that essentially reduce the blast radius, give you additional protections against some future threat that you don't know about today. So it's kind of long-winded. Does that make sense?
That's really interesting, because that's very in line with where I think a lot of these approaches are not realistic about it, right? It's like your point on reducing the blast radius and limiting lateral movement and that stuff. That's where things seem to go wrong. It's not are you never going to have a breach or someone never going to be able to manipulate a piece of software or whatever. The very nature of building something means someone can, to use a dumb word, like unbuild it. So you're going to have that problem, but being able to have control and limit the scope of the problem is much more valuable, I think, just contextually, strategically. When I was going through your site and everything else too, my analyst cockles kind of went up, because I was like, man, these guys have got application security stuff for all kinds of stuff. It even said 5G, and at first I was going, well, wait a minute, that's totally tangential to the problem they're solving. But the more I read, my the hair on the back of my neck kind of went down a bit. Like, how can you explain to folks like how this particular solution set and the security application applies in the context of 5G?
Yeah, sure. So to be clear, we're not tweaking or touching any the transport medium or anything. We're not in the wavelength or carrier transport at all. But if you think about what systems are required to deliver 5G connectivity or LTE or or Wi-Fi or any of the other types of wireless solutions, you need some software running on both ends, right? And those have historically been custom built off of like real-time OS or Linux or some other type of system, and you hire somebody they build X and they ship it. But then you have these questions like, well, we need these other capabilities and we want to run this other set of functions there. So then you have to, build it, patch, ship a patch, get it to run, etc. And so what's happened is this pattern for software development and deployment and management has, figured out that, gosh, Kubernetes and, containerization is a pretty good model for doing all that, right? There's huge open source community. There's major tech players behind this. And so if I'm a Verizon, T-Mobile, Orange, or even other tier layers of providers that want to enable this functionality, um, I don't have to reinvent everything from scratch. I don't have to have that whole part. So I can adopt the containerization orchestration model that you know enables me to get product to market faster, customize it, react quicker to customer requirements. A lot of these 5G systems are not just, we think about it from our iPhone or our Android, right? Our mobile phone in our pocket. But the reality is, this technology is very robust and has a lot of promise and real world use to, enterprise and businesses. Say, for example, in manufacturing, you've got warehouses where you have, robots that are now driven by AI, right? Hey, get out of the way of that forklift, right? Um, how are you going to have these things communicate? Well, historically, it was, Wi-Fi, and then you went, you know, that has reliability issues, right? Um, what if you need to extend the range, right? So all that kind of infrastructure is migrating over to 5G because of its robustness and range and a lot of other factors. And so the systems that are delivering that are being built on Kubernetes is kind of the short answer. That's the you know that's one of the methods. There's other directions, like Intel has a platform, IBM has a platform called Open Horizon. We're integrated with those, and so we're giving the ability to developers and operators to package their applications and wrap them securely with KubeArmor and other AccuKnox functionality, so that they're secure and maintainable no matter where they're deployed. So we're really injecting our capabilities into the pipeline for that provider.
Yeah, I mean that was what kind of got to me after I read through stuff. And I mean, I honestly felt like a bit of a dummy because I was going, wait a minute, these guys aren't doing like 5G networking. And then I had to keep kind of educating on by no means a 5G expert, but just the piece of the application side of it and what's running and et cetera. And the hospitals now just I learned this recently. Hospitals are running pretty much everything on 5G. If not on wireless, it's a backup for, like, even the Da Vinci robot is 5G capable, so that if they're, if the doctor's like literally inside of you doing some surgery and they lose Wi-Fi, it flips over to 5G.
Yeah, can you imagine losing service?
Yeah. What do you do if you're using a Da Vinci robot and all of a sudden Wi-Fi blips out? You just go pull the robot pieces out and kind of start from, whoops.
Yeah.
I would not want to be the network admin tasked with keeping 5 nines of availability on that thing.
Right. Can you imagine like bringing the traditional IT problems into brain surgery
Yeah.
or heart replacement surgery? You're on the table.
Yeah.
We need
No.
to control alt delete the arterial cutting thing, whatever it
Yeah.
is.
The blue screen of death takes on a whole new context in that area, right?
Oh, that's a good one.
That's a if you get a BSOD on a Da Vinci robot, somebody is actually going to die. So that's, yeah, not a cool thing. All right, well, this was a good run through on some of the AccuKnox basic capabilities set. I would encourage those folks that are out there that listen to this, go see what AccuKnox has got if you're doing developer work, or if you're a security person and you're around apps and those things, which most of us are. Reach out to Rick and the folks at AccuKnox. they know more about this stuff than I'll ever know in 10 years. And I appreciate Rick jumping on and kind of running us through what you guys are and what you do.
Yeah, great chatting with you as always, Chase.
All right, we'll catch you guys on the next one.